Welcome to another session of Stelmo's Rants and Raves. I'm Stelmo. Let's just jump right in here. So, tonight we get the big speech from the president. Now, rumors are that the president is going to announce that the two Democrat senators in the state of Georgia were illegally elected. And I say amen to that. This is something I have been saying ever since it happened. You know, when I was in the service, I spent about 18 months in Georgia. And I know it was a long time ago, but I don't think the majority of Georgians just fundamentally shifted so far so fast. I just find that hard to believe. But I find it very easy to believe that through the cheating that they do, especially in their big cities, that they're able to win these seats. The only problem is this has been going on now for ages. And the timid Republican Party is, generally speaking, mute on these issues, which I believe is another reason why people like Donald Trump. People know something's not right with the people that are getting elected. And you know what? I don't know what the president is going to say, but I think it's deeper than just these two senators. And I think it's also deeper in Georgia. I think that there might have been one or two or three representatives in the House that while they had the highest number of votes, that doesn't mean that they had the highest number of people actually casting those votes. And the system is corrupt, and we have John Thune, Senator Thune, people of South Dakota. I hope you're watching this very closely, and hopefully you can put a candidate against this rhino at the as soon as possible time. That is if the country survives that long, and I'm not sure about that at this point in time. Our debt is unraveling. Our debt is going to be the doom of us. And members of both parties have been saying for the longest time that the levels of spending are unsustainable. And as unsustainable as they claim them to be, they keep increasing the amount they spend. And they do nothing to make the picture better. And what does that mean? Well, it certainly means that at some point in time when all of these things are going to equal out, the downfall is going to be so much more painful for us than it really has to be. And, I want to get back to Senator Thune because he claims he doesn't have the 60 votes. And I agree, not having 60 votes is a problem. Perhaps they would have 60 votes if, and I know this is a big if, but all the elections were held fairly. Now, and I want to, this is a question I've asked several times. Nobody's ever been able to answer it. So certainly if anyone out there has any answers on this question, I would love to hear it. What was wrong with the old voting machines that we had to change? Those voting machines were, as reliable as you could ask for. And I served as a poll challenger for years. I saw how these machines worked. If each party had challengers at the election, I would say it's virtually impossible to cheat on those machines. The cheating years ago, because the cheating's been going on forever, but years ago, the cheating was done in the absentee ballots. Now they do the absentee ballots and all of this other stuff. I'm never going to forget my voting story. And I admit, when I was younger, I was a bit more, I don't want to say radical, but I was certainly vocal. and I let the appropriate people hear my concerns when I had them. And I went to vote one year, and this was it was before the Al Gore election, where we had the hanging chads in Florida. So it was the previous election to that, and this was the first time that, at least here in Florida where I'm at, that we didn't use the old voting machines. And instead, we had these paper ballots, and kind of like, back in school days when we had different national and statewide testing things. You used to have to use the pencil and fill in the little circles and things. And that's how this ballot was. And I was immediately very concerned over what I saw. Now, why was I concerned? Well, and let me back up and say, you have to understand the time frame. This was before computers and all of this new technology came onto the scene. And however, I don't want to say I was a nerd, but I enjoyed the early boom of technology. Let's put it that way. And so my concern was, as I was given the ballot for me to vote, I noticed something. They had this large, it was like a pad, and it had a perforated edge where they separated the ballot from the receipt. And my concern was, I had to sign the receipt, and there was a number. Each ballot had a number assigned to it, and I had to sign the receipt to get my ballot. Well, my concern was there was a barcode on the receipt, and the very same barcode was on my ballot. And I said, well, look at this. This is not safe, secure, or the way things should be. And I reluctantly cast my ballot, but like I said, I was somewhat of a, I'll say I was a protagonist of sorts, I guess. Anyway, I got on the phone, and I started calling. And I eventually got the supervisor of elections on the phone. And she just couldn't understand what my major concern was. And I'm saying, ma'am, my concern is they know how we voted. I said, I had to sign a receipt that had a barcode on it, and that very same barcode was on my ballot. And so as the conversation between us progressed, what she's revealing to me, and she was providing this answer sort of as like it's a valid excuse, and I just felt it became even more alarming, because she says, no, we don't know how people voted. We don't even count these votes. We send these to a third-party vendor to get counted. And of course, I'm saying to myself, oh, a third-party vendor, and I'm saying, I wonder how come this hasn't been in the news? Because again, this was before all of this modern technology. And so I got my news from the newspaper. Back then, newspapers were a big thing. And I read my local newspaper every day, and never did I ever see anything about this changing in the voting system, and that they would allow our votes to be counted by some alleged disinterested third parties. Anyway, I got nowhere with this woman because she didn't see the problem. And I was besides myself. I'm like, this is surreal, but yet I can see that it's happening. So after talking to the local supervisor of elections, and her actually, in my mind, making the matters worse than I actually thought it was, I decided I would go to the press. And it was crickets. Nobody reported on it. And, you know, I think back about this a lot. And I say to myself, you know, perhaps she just was really naive. You know, I don't know who was behind this. I know that I live in a very, very, very red area. So I don't think it was any progressive loon or anyone who was behind this. Although I certainly suggest that this was perhaps an operation by some loony leftists out there intent on trying to figure out how people vote. But nothing ever come of that, and of course nowadays election security is a major issue. And like I say, tonight we're going to hear. I'm absolutely confident he's going to come out finally and say that the two senators that got elected in Georgia, it was a fixed election. But see, here's the problem. We had two Republicans in Georgia that sold out their party and their constituents. And that's Raffensperger and, I'm not even going to remember the name of the governor there right off the top of my head. I can see his face clearly. And every time I see it, I get his face, I get indigestion because I knew what these two people had done. And the problem is none of these people, not a one of them, is being prosecuted. It would be nice to think that perhaps simultaneously with this event tonight, with this speech tonight, that we hear that the FBI went out and is making apprehensions to the people who cheated in these elections. But that's not going to happen. And we got, on our side, we got Senator John Thune, who's saying he doesn't have the 60 votes. Well, Mr. Thune, the first thing you can do is tell the Republicans who are against the Save America Act, tell them you're going to pull all their committee assignments. Do what the Democrats do. I think you'll see them fall into line real quick because they don't want to give up the perks that they get from being members of these committees. And of course, we know that these committees, they don't do their job. I mean, they have oversight on all of the departments that spend all of our money, all of the money we don't have and that we have to borrow. And so you have sorry about that break there. I had to stop because I was losing the point I was making. And this is one of the problems that I have with this short-term memory problem. And I am absolutely convinced that my short-term memory problem is a result of my taking two of those injections that they more or less mandated we take for the plandemic. And again, this is a serious thing. We now know about all of the lying that Fauci did, and he was funding the lab in Wuhan. All of this violates countless American laws. And has he been charged yet? No. Okay, there's the issue of the pardons, but that has to be tested in court. And even if Fauci ultimately wins, he's going to have to spend tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on attorney's fees and such. None of that is compensable if he prevails. And that's the big problem that the GOP has. Whenever they think they can't win on an issue, they just don't do anything. And I find that problematic because I think you need to put these various office holders on the record voting against some of these measures. But instead, there are so many things that don't happen. And also, in this same vein, you have prosecutions that don't happen because they say, oh, well, we're never going to get a conviction in Washington, D.C. Well, one of the things I never hear anyone talk about is we know about all of the weaponization. No, let me back up. Perhaps we think we know all of the weaponization that both the Biden and Obama administrations did. However, on second thought there, I'm saying to myself, perhaps there's still a lot more we haven't found out. But aside from that, they were out there weaponizing the government. They were cheating in elections. So what's not to say that they weren't cheating in the panels? And that's, I believe, the correct terminology. It's a panel of prospective jurors that the clerk puts together and provides to the court for prosecutions, or I should say for court cases, because both civil and criminal are entitled to have juries. And I suggest that these panels perhaps have been corrupted in a way where they were guaranteed to have at least one person on any jury that is picked that's going to steadfastly hold for acquittal, which ultimately would mean that they would at least be able to get a mistrial, if not an absolute exoneration. But I never hear anyone talk about that. And I don't understand why that wouldn't be just done just like all of the other cheating that they're doing. Because, see, I believe that the majority of Americans are fundamentally a fair people. And I believe if a bona fide jury of a person's peers heard the evidence in a case and the evidence was well presented and was clear the person was guilty, that they would convict them. But yet that hasn't been happening in Washington, D.C. And I suggest the problem there is the panel. And that's why the Trump administration, at least was, and I guess it's safe to say it's still ongoing, they have a grand jury seated here in Florida. They were able to, because of the illegal searches of Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, they're able to impanel the grand jury in Florida, and they're going to be able, assuming that this grand jury is actually looking to get indictments, they're going to be able to indict a number of people. And it is strongly believed that they are more apt to get a conviction in Florida than they will in Washington, D.C. And that's just a problem because the Republicans are now in charge. And Washington, D.C., the way it is set up, ultimately the Republicans control, or they can control, everything that goes on in Washington, D.C. They choose not to, which is fine. I understand. Yeah, it's better to let them have their local government and let them vote on everything. And the president, he certainly got involved, and he, because he was readily able to do this in Washington, D.C., he put a huge dent in the crime pattern and the people there. I've seen some of these YouTube clips where people have gone out there and interviewed the people. And the people are just ecstatic because now they can take their children out to the park and do all sorts of things that they couldn't do during the rampant crime. But, and And let me say, these people know who is responsible for that. And see, I believe that in any other area, that these people, they're not going to tolerate this absolute nonsense with protecting criminals that don't belong here. They're illegally here. And yet, for some reason, the socialists want these people to stay here to keep committing their crimes. See, they want to collapse our government. And a fine way to do it in their eyes is anarchy, where, unfortunately, far too many people will be sent to the undertaker for mortuary services. And it's a shame that we have to couch it in such language because these loons monitor everything we say and do anymore. And yes, both parties are complicit in that. And, that just reminds me of something else I got to mention. I found it rich that Amy Coney Barrett is before Congress complaining about the threats to her family and that they need added armed security. Well, Miss Barrett, you keep seeming to want to make these loony leftists your friends, and you keep being involved in ridiculous court opinions where you betray your alleged political beliefs. They're never going to like you. And yes, they want to see you put in line for mortuary services. We saw how, in violation of the law, the Biden DOJ allowed the protests to go on at the Supreme Court members' homes. And why did that happen? Nobody wants to say it, but they were hoping that one or more of these conservative or right-leaning justices were also sent to the mortician, because then they could be replaced with a loony leftist. And it was crystal clear that anybody who could see what was going on out there should be able to put two and two together. But yet very little happens. Nobody gets charged, or when people do get charged, it's always the low-level people. Out of all of this corruption, what high-ranking individual has been arrested? All we keep hearing about is we hear all of these various members of the administration coming out and telling us about all of the criminal acts that are going on. Well, we're aware of all of this crime. We're also aware that it doesn't appear that any elected officials are going to be held accountable. Now, I know people are going to say, well, it's still early, they got time. Time is flying by. The Trump administration is, I would suggest, a third of the way through right now. And these court cases, they don't happen overnight. Once the indictment is filed and the people are actually charged, this process has to be ongoing, and I don't see it happening. I keep keeping my fingers crossed, hoping that there's like a secret military tribunal because of the potential treason and subversion and other very serious crimes. But I don't know what it is with the DOJ, but there's just very few arrests. How many times has a Republican committee sent to the DOJ a packet with a criminal referral? And the packet had all the proof that they need, and yet nothing happens. Nothing seems to happen with all these referrals. And I get frustrated because I keep hearing Republicans all the time talk about all of the crime and everything, but I don't hear them condemning the DOJ for just allowing this. Nobody's getting charged. And it's one of those things where I'll be patient, just wait for tomorrow. Well, you see, I'm old, so I have a lot of experience and with the Republican Party and the gaslighting that they have done to us voters over the course of decades. I remember the way it used to be is they would have to raise the debt limit, and they would say, "Oh well, this is not the mountain to fight our big battle on. We're going to wait. We're going to get them in the budget, so we're going to have to approve this increase now, but we're going to get them." And then come budget time, they would say, this isn't the mountain for us to die on. We're going to have to get them when it comes time to raise the debt limit. And it was this vicious cycle that went on and on and on, and they never did anything. Well, I shouldn't say they never did anything, but they never did most of what was expected of them, because everybody was waiting for tomorrow. Well, let me tell you, these Democrat socialists are not people who are going to patiently sit back and wait for tomorrow. They're living in the present. And they don't like our government. They want to see our government replaced with an alleged socialist mecca. And again, we all know it's not going to happen. The mecca part, in other words, it's never going to be this utopia that they promise. But the way I look at it now, we're going to go down that route because the Republican Party, true to form, I mean, this is what they've done for decades. They get in power and do nothing. And there is a lot of things a lot more that they could get accomplished with the members that they have, and they're just choosing not to. Because they really don't want to, because a good portion of them are deep staters. They're more interested in lining their pockets with gold than doing the fair bidding for their constituents. And so that's why ultimately I think the country's doomed. I mean, I hope I'm proven wrong. I really do. I don't want to see the greatest country in the world collapse. But I think that's what's going to happen. Because ultimately what's going to choke us to death is our debt. And hopefully I can say that thing about, but then again, maybe not, because, and where are our Republican lawmakers on this problem online, on these leftist companies? And the thing is I know they all think that because they're part of the team, they're going to escape the problems down the road. Well, let me wake you all up to reality, and that is, once they get in power, they're going to bleed these companies dry. And all of these people who are so wanting to see this leftist utopia are going to be rudely awakened at some point in time. They're not going to like what they see, and they're going to know that they were all complicit in it, and that they had been taken advantage of. And it's a shame. It really is a shame that this country is experiencing the things that they have. But anyway, I wanted to touch base. The president is going to give a speech tonight. And in the meantime, the war in Iran continues. And again, you got the president. He's back to making these ridiculous threats. Mr. President, you're never going to scare them into submission, okay? I've gone over this repeatedly, and I think ultimately you know this, but somehow you think that Well, I don't know what you're thinking. What I know is you need to figure out how, using our great military, we're going to accomplish a couple things. We need to get the Strait of Hormuz open. We need to stop these almost daily attacks on the Iranians' neighbors. And we need to, as soon as possible, go back to a state of somewhat normalcy. But perhaps I'm dreaming, and perhaps that's not going to happen. We have so many headwinds pushing in our faces right now. I don't know how any of this is going to ultimately pan out, but I'm going to be here, and I'll be doing my, obviously, much more ranting than raving. But on the raving side, let me, in closing, say it is going to be nice to hear the president in a prime time address. It's going to be very nice. And with that, I will be back tomorrow to talk about the address and whatever else is going on there out in this crazy world we now live in. With that, y'all stay safe. Have a great day. Bye-bye.